Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I talk with Rabbi Tamar Magill-Grimm, the new director of Hineni at Talmud Torah of St. Paul. We talk about her move from the pulpit, splitting time between Beth Jacob and Hineni for the time being, and how being a Jewish educator helped lead her to the pulpit on this week's Who the Folk podcast. But before we get started, be sure to check out some of the other podcasts that Jewfolk produces, like The Jews Are Tired, where Lev Gringos is taking a deep dive into Jewish news, Kumba Hineni, Jewfolk's podcast on intersectionality with your host, Enzi Tanner. And if you're looking for a weekly dose of Jewish pop culture, check out The Bagel Report, produced by Jewfolk in partnership with Jay, the Jewish News of Northern California. Go to tcjewfolk.com/podcast to learn more. Rabbi Tamar Magill-Grimm, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
You are a familiar face to many in the Twin Cities, or at least the possibly more the St. Paul side, as rabbi at Beth Jacob. You have now a new position that you have taken on. You started recently. You are the new director of Hineni, the adult education component of Talmud Torah of St. Paul. So first of all, mazel tov on the opportunity. That is, sounds fantastic. And second of all, what was it that was appealing to you about this particular opportunity?
So, I have always had a passion for Jewish education. That is how I got into the rabbinate in the first place. I was working at Beth Shalom in Minnetonka and as an educator, and wanted to go further my studies and wound up in rabbinical school. But Jewish education was sort of the impetus for all of that. So I have a passion for Jewish education. And I was really excited about the idea of getting to work primarily with adults. I've been working with children a lot. I have small children. I love children, but this is a nice balance for me.
So you mentioned you grew up in Minneapolis. So you're from the area, you know the area well. Obviously, Talmud Torah of St. Paul is a long-standing institution in the Twin Cities Jewish education scene. What was it that sort of propelled you into Jewish education in the first place, particularly after your undergrad studies?
Well, I had an amazing experience at the Minneapolis Talmud Torah. So we lived, when I was growing up, we lived in St. Louis Park. We lived right near the Minneapolis Talmud Torah. I had amazing teachers there who really cared about me. And I worked there on my days when I didn't have classes. I tutored the younger students. I just lived at the Minneapolis Talmud Torah as a kid. So it's just always been part of my life.
Okay. So you said that it was Jewish education that was the impetus for the rabbinate. I guess at what point in your studies did you realize that it wasn't just learning more to become a better Jewish educator, but that the path was becoming a rabbi?
It actually was before I went to rabbinical school. So I had just very briefly been working at Beth Shalom in Minnetonka, and there were times in that role where I found myself helping people through some really challenging times. I had a parent who came to me. A friend had been in a very serious car accident and her children had been hurt. And, I helped counsel her through that, helped her sort of figure out a Jewish way of thinking about that. So there were pastoral moments that happened in my role as educator that I thought, this is also something I feel is really a part of my path. This feels like a gift I have to offer. And so it wasn't just Jewish education that motivated me to continue my studies. So it was really both. And I now am doing exactly what I want to be doing, which is working part-time at Beth Jacob doing pastoral care and working part-time at Hineni running Jewish education programs. So it's really a good balance for me.
So the balance is there, but obviously going from a pulpit rabbi position to a non-pulpit position, and there are, I preface this question with the statement, there are many phenomenal rabbis who have no interest in being on the pulpit, that they do things in education and camp. There are plenty of rabbinic opportunities that don't have anything to do with being a pulpit rabbi. But after having done the pulpit thing for a while, has it been a big sort of shift in either mentality or just sort of overall feel that comes with stepping back from that role?
For sure. I think that the past few years have been a very challenging time to be a congregational rabbi. They've been challenging for all of us,
Mm.
but particularly, I think, for congregational rabbis, trying to both navigate our own experience of the trauma of the last few years and be leaders in that, try to hold other people's experience of that and try to help them make sense of that. It's been overwhelming, and frankly I was starting to just be really burned out in trying to hold so much, and it's something that I want to do well. And so it's possible that someday I'll go back into congregational work. I don't know, but I recognized in myself a need for working on something that was manageable, a little bit more, had more boundaries to it, um, and also something that I'm really passionate about, and I feel like makes a difference in people's lives. But this is a recharge moment for me. That's kind of how I see it in some ways, and um, I think all rabbis need that. Some rabbis take sabbaticals. This is like, for me, I get to do something that I love and I'm passionate about. But I get a little bit of a break from what I think has been a really challenging time in congregational life.
As talk to friends and colleagues who have the same title and jobs that you do, whether in the Twin Cities or around the country, are you finding that sort of anecdotally people are telling you the same thing? Just sort of the burnout, the exhaustion, the fatigue of these last few years has really hit pretty hard.
Yes, absolutely. I have one of my closest friends is a rabbi, not even in this country, and she and I have been talking a lot recently, and she has said that she has sort of hit a point where she's really rethinking her role as a rabbi altogether. That kind of coming through the pandemic and it not sort of going back to quote unquote normal, without having an opportunity to heal and reflect and figure out where we're going in this world. She said she's really just like having to recalculate. She's not able to feel as energized and motivated towards the prophetic sermons that she ordinarily gives, and so she's in a space of doing that. She's able to do that, luckily, with the support of the environment that she's in. There are three rabbis there. Anyway, this is kind of getting long-winded. You might want to cut some of this,
No,
but
no, no. That's okay. I think it's helpful for people to sort of understand, to get like, I think we've read articles, and we, in sort of like maybe private one-on-one conversations, people will sort of get that impression from their rabbi, whether it is, a friend somewhere else or the rabbi that they're close to at their own congregation. But I think to sort of for people to, outside of a one-on-one conversation, hear that verbalized, I think that's really important. I think people need to I think it's helpful for people to understand the strain of what it's been like for people in your
yeah, no,
position.
I appreciate that. I think it is helpful for people to try to understand that. And I think, we're seeing a lot of rabbis doing things to take care of themselves. A lot of um, my colleagues have either been on sabbaticals recently or are taking sabbaticals recently because people couldn't do that during
Right.
the shutdown, right? Part of the pandemic. So, people are finding ways to take care of themselves, and that's really important. And but we're seeing there aren't enough rabbis out there for all the
Right.
congregations. There's a dearth of rabbis, and so that at some point will have to get addressed. But
Right. And so knowing that there is this shortage of rabbis has been written about fairly extensively. JTA, the Forward Event articles about this. Did it make it even harder for you to make the decision, knowing that there just aren't enough rabbis right now?
it actually didn't, because I really believe that to be a rabbi in the way that I would want to be a rabbi, I would need to have the energy, the motivation, the space, the time. Frankly, I have two small kids. You know,
Right.
I think there's a lot of need in the world, and we all have to find our place to do our tikkun of the world, to make the world better, and to give our gifts to the world. So it was actually not that hard for me to decide, because I felt like I have a place where I can give through my teaching.
Yeah. And, it's funny. We talk about these last 3 years and the challenge of being a rabbi in this time period, sort of almost in isolation. But it's not like this was a super easy job full of free time. It's still 24/7. The demands are still pretty high. You're still very public. The boundaries probably were always a challenge.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of rabbis shifting into lots of different ways of doing their work in the world, right? And so I don't see myself as not a rabbi anymore. Somebody actually said to me, like, "Oh, you're leaving the rabbinate." I said, "No, I'm not leaving the rabbinate. I'm still a rabbi, but my focus is on how can the wisdom of our tradition inform people's lives through their learning, right?" So it's still rabbinic work in my mind.
That's so funny that people you've earned the title.
Right.
You've done the work, you've earned the title. It's like people don't. I mean, I suppose technically at some point doctors stop being doctors if they retire and don't do the continuing education they need to do to maintain certifications, but they're still a doctor. Like the title is still earned. They may not be certified, but like you're still a rabbi.
For sure. Yeah.
That doesn't change. So going into this education space, which has always been a passion of yours. Back to, like you said, pre-rabbinate days. Hineni is a really, I think, a fascinating program in the sort of Twin Cities Jewish education landscape. For people who don't know a lot about what Hineni is, can you explain a little bit how it works and how it all fits in the larger ecosystem?
Legend. Well, I think most people in this community know Sarah Lynn Neuberger, who is the founder of Hineni, and
legend. She's great.
Yeah, exactly. This really was a dream of hers, and I'm really honored that she is trusting me and advising me and moving it forward. Hineni is both serious learning and also contemplative practices. And the vision is that there are people in our community who want to be engaged in serious study, right? Not just introductory classes, or, not to knock Parshat HaShavua. Parshat HaShavua is great, right? And in fact, we have Parshat HaShavua as part of our offerings, but could we level up on that a little bit? And for people who really want to go deep, introducing Hasidic thought, right? Introducing Kabbalah, we've partnered with the Twin Cities Musar, so on a lot of things. So there's just a depth, I think, that is unique that Hineni offers.
And it's you mentioned the partnership with Twin Cities Musar, but Hineni is partnered with basically, I mean, it may not just be basically, I mean, maybe actually be every synagogue in the Twin Cities and
Absolutely.
Clergy at every synagogue in the Twin Cities in some way for some program as a way to, and it's not, yes, it's a program of Talmud Torah of St. Paul, but it's also held oftentimes at these other synagogues. So it's something that, yes, it is an East Side based program, but it's something that represents Jewish education for the entire community if that's what you're looking for.
That's right. And thank you for saying that. And yes, it is a program of the Talmud Torah of St. Paul, but it is a Twin Cities program, really. And we, for our summer series, we have all of the classes are taught by clergy in our community. And then, of course, we have Engage coming up, which I'm hoping we'll spend a little time talking about because it's our most popular program. And we're very excited to be able to do it in person. We haven't been able to do that since just before the shutdown in February of 2020.
Okay, so perfect segue. You're professional broadcaster. That was excellent. Tell everyone about Engage. Like you said, it is your biggest program. What is the program and what is this year's sort of offering with it?
Yeah, so Engage is an opportunity for people to choose from a variety of classes and topics taught by some of the amazing scholars in our midst in the Twin Cities. In the past, it's been often on Saturday evenings, but this year because I started only in the end of November and kind of had to push it back a little bit. It's going to be March 26th. It's going to be on a Sunday morning. And I'm excited for a Sunday morning program. I think people will really like it. We're going to have brunch, and we'll have 2 different sessions like we have in the past. And people can choose from just such a variety of offerings, everything from, there's a lot that's pre-Pesach offerings. But everything from like traditional text study to Jill Averin from Beth Shalom is going to be doing her Torah, Parshat HaShavua challah making. So there's really quite a variety. Noam Sian is going to teach a class on the history of Charoset. Lots of great offerings.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I am friends on Facebook with Rabbi Jill, and she it's phenomenal the challah she makes and the story she tells with it. So that is such a cool thing for people to learn from if that's something they're into. But again, so to the idea of working with and partnering, the community partners for this event, Adath, Beth Jacob, Heritage Judaica, Bet Shalom, Mount Zion, Shir Tikva, Temple Israel. It's across the Twin Cities, across denominations.
Exactly. And we're really excited to partner with Heritage Judaica. They're going to do a pop-up event that day. And so people will be able to get their Passover items at the event. And I think it's just going to be a really fun collaboration.
And for people who want to learn more on Heritage Judaica, Sonia Rapport is the program director there right now. I interviewed her a few weeks ago, and we'll have a link to that interview in the show notes, because that was a really fun discussion too. And she, of course, is now also at Beth Jacob as well.
Yep.
So, and then Heritage Judaica is based out of there. So it all sort of knits together, and all roads run through Mendota Heights.
That's one way to look at it. Yeah, listen, there's a lot going on in St. Paul. I think sometimes, having grown up in Minneapolis, I didn't always understand that, and now that I live in St. Paul, it's I love it.
And it's funny. I live in Minneapolis now, or at least the Minneapolis side of town now. But growing up, I've family who lived in St. Paul, and so I don't really remember going to Minneapolis at all. When we went to Minnesota, we weren't coming to Minneapolis to visit; we were coming to St. Paul to visit. So it's it is a great community, and so it's great that there are these programs happening here. But again, they're based there, but they benefit everyone who's looking for something like this.
Right. So and can I say one more thing?
Please.
Engage has always been put on. It's a partnership with the JCC. And that started before the JCC's merged. So that's another example of how, we're one community, and we have these programs that we collaborate with everyone in the community on.
So you mentioned Sarah Lynn Neuberger, who recently retired, late 22, from the director. She's the founding director of Hineni. Is there any pressure, do you feel, taking this role, having to succeed somebody like her who holds this place in the Twin Cities Jewish community, education world?
I'm going to steal a line from Rabbi David Thomas, who some of you might know, and he's also on the faculty of Hineni. So when he took over the shul in Sudbury, Massachusetts, so that was the shul that Larry Kushner had been at. So, everyone said to him, "Oh, you have really big shoes to fill." And he said, "Luckily I brought my own shoes." So listen,
that's excellent.
There's no replacing Sarah Lynn Neuberger. There's no one like her in the world. And I feel so blessed that she is my friend and still advising me on Hineni. I can call her pretty much anytime. She answers my calls. And I have an interest in expanding the program in ways that will be interesting to me. And I'm looking at, because I have this background in working with children as well, as does she, one of the things I'm looking at is, are there possibilities for more professional development for Jewish educators in the Twin Cities, and could Hineni expand those opportunities? I'm looking at, we've partnered with a lot of different people, and could we expand our faculty? In what ways do we want to grow the program? So
I was going to ask you, I know it's been, that was actually going to be my next question, was have you looked at ways to expand? And I'm glad you're thinking about it. We don't have to jump the gun quite yet if you're not ready to divulge all of that. But I will sort of spin that to another question, which is, who do you go to for sort of those ideas? How do you bounce things off to, what sounds good to you may not resonate sort of within the broader community. So is there a board? Are there advisors, or is it just sort of all fall to you as the director?
There is an advisory committee. And I've met with those people individually. We haven't had like a group meeting yet, although maybe we will soon, hopefully. But yeah, I am someone who really loves to bounce ideas off people, and I sort of need to talk through things as I'm working on them. And so it's been great. And, I'm also co-chairing the MRA right now. So I have a lot of connections with my colleagues in the MRA. Frankly, a lot of times I just call some of them up and say, hey, what do you think of this idea? Do you want to collaborate on this class? And people come to me, which is so great. People, some of the rabbis at various synagogues will just call me up or write me an email and say, hey, we're going to teach this class. Does Hineni want to co-sponsor it? And most of the time I do. So it's a lot of that infrastructure is just already in place. Which is
great. I mean, it's great to come to a program that's that well respected, that people are willing to sort of ring you up and say, hey, we're doing this thing. You want to be involved.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Pretty fun when it all works out that way.
Yeah.
Well, Rabbi Tamar, last couple of questions and we will let you get back to it. First, what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Oh, wow. My favorite Jewish holiday is Sukkot. I know Purim's coming up, and Purim is fun too, but Sukkot is my favorite Jewish holiday. I love eating outside under the stars with friends and making lots of food and having people over like every night for a week. It's great.
And sometimes the weather even cooperates in Minnesota for that to happen.
Sometimes.
And speaking of food, what is your favorite Jewish food?
Such a tough call. I just love all Jewish food, but I do really like a good hummus, like nothing store bought, but I like to make hummus and I like to put different toppings on it. And yeah.
Excellent. Do you have you don't have to divulge the source, but do you have a go-to recipe that you use?
Yeah. I mean, I make a hummus tahina, and I always drizzle it with olive oil and then some sprinkling of either za'atar or smoked paprika or dukkah or some kind of sprinkling like that on top.
Very fun. Well, Rabbi Tamar Magill-Grimm, the new director of Hineni of Talmud Torah of St. Paul, thank you so much for joining me at Mazel Tov on the new job, and best of luck as you continue to grow into that new position.
Thank you so much. Great talking to you.
You as well. The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.